Hello, and welcome to the Sailing and Cruising the East Coast of the United States podcast. I'm Bela Musitz.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
This is our podcast about sailing the East Coast of the United States. In some episodes, we'll focus on passages and destinations. And in other episodes, we'll talk about boats, equipment, and techniques. And every once in a while, we'll come across an interesting person, and we'll try to get them as a guest on the show.
Now, what makes this podcast unusual is that only one of us sails.
Yeah, that would be me, Bela. I've been sailing for over 30 years, not across oceans, but on lakes and coastal cruising on the East Coast of the United States.
And I, Mike, know very little about sailing. Tack versus jib, starboard versus port, it all confuses me. So, I ask the questions and Bela, you give the answers, and that's the way I like it.
Yeah, well, I'll do my best, Mike. Before we dive into this episode, we want to say a special thank you to our supporters. We now have a Patreon page, so if you'd like to support the podcast, it's super easy. Just go to patreon.com/sailing the East. And thanks again to all of our listeners, and a special thanks to our supporters.
Agreed, Bela. Thanks to everybody. Now, this is the second part today of our third conversation with Mike Malekoff. Okay, do you got that? Second part of the third conversation. He was a guest back in episode 66 and in 72 and 73, which was a two-parter, and part one of this conversation, which is episode 70, which was 77. This is 78. Now, he started on his trip, if I remember correctly, on Lake Champlain, and there was the goal of making it to the Bahamas, right? 66 was he was on land in Lake Champlain telling us about it. 72 and 73, he was underway from Lake Champlain, and now this is the end of the update. So listen to 77 first, and then we'll follow his progress as he's kind of heading toward the islands.
Yeah, so this was a great conversation with him. He was actually in the cockpit of his boat. And while we recorded this, he had a drink in his hand. It looked quite nice, and I was very envious because I was sitting in cold, snowy upstate New York. So make sure you listen to actually all the episodes with Mike. I think it's a real entertaining series of episodes.
Great. I can't wait to hear how this one ends. I'm on the edge of my seat. So let's pick it right back up from the end of episode 77 and jump right to the conversation, the final part of the conversation with Mike Malekoff.
Right. So, any problems with seasickness when you were outside?
Our boat is all fiberglass, so I don't have any wood to knock on to say no. Neither one of us has had a problem. Carrie, my wife, has said, sometimes when she goes below to say make some food or something and we're bouncing around a bit, that it can get a bit disturbing, where she needs to come up into the cockpit. And she's taken some stuff to prevent it, but it doesn't really bother me at all. So I'm just lucky, I guess,
That's
in
great.
that respect.
And remind our listeners what boat you have.
We have a boat very similar to yours. We have a Hunter 44 deck salon.
Yep. Very good. I just wanted to make sure that, people listening knew that as well. And so you made down to eventually, where did you, so you down in Charleston, and then from where'd you go after that?
Then from Charleston, we went all the way down to Brunswick, Georgia. Mm-hmm. And then from Brunswick, Georgia, we went outside and went down into Florida, into Fernandina.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just made our way slowly down. And eventually we ended up two places we really liked. We were in Vero Beach, which had a mooring system, but it was a really well-run public marina that it was a short walk into town. And we were there for a few days. And then eventually we got into Jensen Beach and got on a mooring ball, and they had a town or county mooring system there. And we stayed there for 2 or 3 weeks, finishing all the work on the boat because we improved all of our solar on the boat. And we have over, I think it's 700 watts of solar now on the boat. So one of the things we were figuring out is we had some solar, but we didn't know how much we would really need. So we figured, well, let's see as we're going south, we'll see how things are going. And then once we get to Florida, we can determine that and then we can add solar because we're in Florida. Boating is huge. There's tons of marinas. There's tons of
Right.
electricians. There, everything is here. So we can do it in Florida. The mistake I made was every boat in the US is in Florida at the time, and every marina is packed, and every marine electrician is booked for 3 months out. So we had someone design the system for us, and my wife and I installed it, and we did a great job.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. So, do you have a generator on the boat?
Yes, we have a Panda 6,000 watt generator.
Yeah. Yeah. Same as mine. So what made you sort of, talk through the energy and sort of the conclusion you wanted to add more solar versus running the generator for a period of time or,
Correct.
et cetera?
Yeah, again, obviously when you're running the engine, if we're motoring, obviously it recharges the batteries.
Yeah.
And then, but what we wanted to do is once we knew, and in Jensen Beach, we were off the dock, we were on our own, we weren't
Right.
powered, on land, really getting an idea of what our power needs are. And as you know, today's boats and technology, we have everything from air conditioning to central vac on this boat, and microwaves and toasters, and it all uses energy. And we wanted to make sure that we had sufficient power so that we weren't running a generator constantly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think we're holding our own. Even it's a lot of 700 plus watts is a lot, but it's still holding our own. That it is recharging during the day, and
Yeah.
but we still run the generator. Or right now we're in a marina and we're hooked to power, but we're not really using it much.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the nice thing about solar is it's quiet. Right. It just,
Yes, it's very quiet.
yeah, that's the
Well,
beauty of it.
my wife worries with the generator. My wife worries about the noise to the neighbors. Ironically, I don't know if yours is the same. You cannot hear our generator at all outside the boat. It's only downstairs in the salon
Right.
that you can hear the generator, and it does have that case. Does yours have the white case, the soundproof case?
Yep.
Yeah, and it does a great job, but obviously it's still annoying running a generator.
Yeah. Mine's in that
And
white
it's using
case.
fuel.
It's in that white case, and then it's under the navigation area seat. That's where mine is tucked away.
Yeah, that's exactly where mine is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, you can definitely
So,
hear it down below.
yeah. So anyway, we made it to Jensen Beach, and we got everything ready with the boat. And then the thing was looking for a weather window to cross, and then to get far enough south to make the crossing. And our crossing, we were going to go from south of Miami over to Bimini,
Mhm.
which is like the shortest jump and the
Yes.
closest island there. And the reason that you go so far south is because the Gulf Stream, which can be up to 4 knots, carries you north. So you want to be south of your destination. So we went to a location south of Miami called No Name Harbor,
Mm-hmm.
which is about 15 or so miles south. And then the morning that we left, we went an additional 10 or 12 miles south, and then started to cross. And as we're crossing, the Gulf Stream started carrying us north, and we picked up speed where we were doing 7.5 to 8 knots in the Gulf Stream, and crossed in one day. And it was fantastic because it's a big deal. You're getting out on the ocean, you're crossing the Gulf Stream. Bela, it was like a lake. There wasn't a ripple in the water, and we couldn't really sail, but that was okay with us because it was as calm as could be.
Yeah. Yeah. So you ended up motoring across for the most part?
Motored across, made it there. We thought we'd make it by 3 or 4 o'clock. We made it by 2:30.
Oh, what time did you leave in the morning?
We left right at dawn, which was around 6 o'clock.
Oh,
So we were pulling
wow.
out. It was still dark.
Yeah.
But as soon as we left, there were other boats leaving the same time. all because it was going to be such an easy crossing. A lot of people were jumping over that way.
Yeah.
And so we got over there. Getting into Bimini was a little tricky because they're not as particular about maintaining their markers as we are here in the
Yeah.
States. So it's like they might be there, they might not, but it was really good because there were some other boats that were very helpful that knew the inlet that helped us avoid the sand and the shoaling and the current was pretty strong there.
Yeah.
And so there's boats in front of us, there's boats behind us. And here is the neat thing. The guy that helped us in, he said, you can see the bottom everywhere. He said, just follow the colors. And it was like, oh, that's eye-opening because the lighter it gets, the shallower it is. And literally the water over here is so crystal clear that you can see everything. And as it lightens, it gets shallower. So we made it in, and as we're going in, sort of surreal, I'd say 6-foot wide manta ray jumped up in front of our boat, completely out of the water and splashed down.
Oh my gosh.
It was the
Wow.
coolest thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've basically we've made it over here, and we went from Bimini, and then we did another long day and came over to the Berry Islands, and we're staying here for a week or so, and we're waiting for another weather window. But right now we're really happy. We achieved our plan or our goal or whatever. We're in the Bahamas on our boat.
Yeah. Yeah.
And enjoying life. That every day it's 80 degrees and sunny, and the water here is just incredible. So we can sit on our boat and we look down and watch the sharks go by, and the manta rays and everything else where we're located. So
Yeah. So let's talk about the crossing a little bit more. What was sort of your go, no go criteria for going across the Gulf Stream over to Bimini?
essentially we used 3 or 4 of the weather systems that are available. The ones that most people are familiar with is like predict wind, wavy. Um, um, there's a couple of others that we were looking at, and one we were looking at, obviously, we wanted southerly winds that were going to push us north. The one thing that people said is you do not want to cross with strong northerly winds because you're going to be fighting it the whole way. So we were looking at that, and we were looking at the sea state. Is that, we found that if we want to be comfortable, if the sea state is 2 to 4 or more in terms of wave height, we're just not going. And I didn't care if we were going to sit there for a week or 2 weeks,
Right.
and some people do and some don't care. But we were waiting for the right day, and fortunately we got like 3 or 4 days where everything just calmed down. And the day we picked, there was not a breath of wind, there wasn't a wave to be seen. And that was, and we left. And it was, for all the planning, I was expecting that to be a challenge, and it turned out it was probably one of the easiest sails we had the entire 6 months we've been gone.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. You certainly hear people talking a lot about the anguish that the crossing the Gulf Stream gives them. And some of them, when if they pick the wrong set of criteria, a northerly wind, and the wind from the north and the Gulf Stream flowing from south to north, it's well documented that gives you big steep waves, and that's
Correct.
not a bargain. Yeah. So it sounds like yours was great.
It was, and I'll say this, and we're still neophytes in this whole sailing business. I will say this: we're very conservative, and the systems that are out there to check the weather, the waves, there's so many of them, and you can guarantee, certainly if you're crossing an ocean, you can only look at the weather, 3 to 5 days out. But when we're going for a day sail like this to cross the Gulf Stream,
Right.
I mean, the day before, you pretty much know what the weather's going to be like the following day.
Yeah.
And if there's anything that's even close to being in the forecast, you just say, we're not going,
Yeah.
we're going to wait. And everything works in a cycle down here in the Bahamas of sort of a counterclockwise wind direction that every week to 10 days, 14 days, the northerly winds they kick up, and then they die down and it moves around, and you have this high that'll come in for several days where it's nice and calm. And, it's fairly regular. And right now we're sitting in a marina because we're going to go out tomorrow, but the weather this Friday and Saturday is supposed to really kick up and be strong, and we're just going to hide back in the marina.
Yeah. Yeah. I have found that those weather apps and those wind apps are pretty darn good for 24 hours or less. Once you start,
Yes.
2 days or 3 days out, then they're still okay, but it's the probability of them being accurate goes down.
Well, yes, and what I've found and what others have told me or that we've talked about, when they all agree, you're in good shape.
Yes.
Where you get nervous is when they don't agree and you're looking out 3 or 4 days.
Right.
Because
Right.
that's a signal that it could go either way. But
That's right.
if you're looking and everybody has the same prediction, and then you're pretty good. And you know what the nice thing, and I've said this in our previous discussions, we've met some unbelievable people out here. Everybody is so helpful. And there are people that have years of experience doing this. And they'll sit with you. They'll go over the weather. They'll show you what they're thinking, where they're going. So it's you have to make your own decision, but it is helpful having
Yeah.
other people give you their 2 cents and stuff. So
Yeah. One of the things that somebody once told me when those weather models diverge is that pick the one that's the worst situation for you and assume that that's what's going to happen. Don't assume the best case, assume the worst case. And if the worst case is okay for you, then you're probably good. But if the worst case is a no-go, then abide by that.
Yeah, that's also true. I think our biggest thing is the winds don't bother us too much. We're pretty good now with handling the boat. When we first got the boat, anything over 5 knots was scary for us.
Yeah.
And then eventually, 10 is a little better, and wow, the boat really sails well at 15. And I can handle the boat at 20 plus. But it's the waves. And I think that's the thing that, we're still anxious about is, when you're in the 5 to 6 foot waves, it's just not fun.
Yeah.
But you know what, we take it one day at a time, and, we avoid, again, we're conservative sailors.
Yeah.
And, just making sure that we're not getting into anything that we feel we can't handle. So, so that's where we're
great.
at.
So,
hey, I'd like to continue this, but tonight is big pizza night here at the marina.
Yeah.
And things work a certain way here in the Bahamas. You sign up for things. That everything is done in an orderly fashion, and if you're not ready, you miss out. They don't wait for you.
Got it. Can you give me 5 more minutes, Mike? I had like 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap up.
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So my one question was, what are some of the things that you wish you knew that someone would have told you, that you have learned along the way?
I'll say one thing, and I mentioned it before. For all the sailing knowledge that I gained to prepare to handle the boat is all the other stuff that no one ever talked about that we've learned on our own, like something as simple as, we have a bridle for our when we anchor the boat.
Yes.
And okay, do you know how difficult it is to get the bridle on if you don't know how to hook that hook onto the chain, your anchor chain?
Yeah.
And the first couple times I did it, I was so frustrated because it's like this hook doesn't stay on the chain. I can't get it to stay on the chain. Well, lo and behold, I spoke with somebody and then said, well, here's the way it really works.
Yeah.
And now it's a piece of cake. So, it's, simple things along those lines, like no one telling us about the shrimp.
Yeah.
It's all the what I'll call non-sailing things
Mhm.
that I could probably write a book about. About your dinghy that we carry with us. We learned the hard way. We have a davits to hang the dinghy off the
Yep.
back. When we're going on a passage or something long, we don't keep it on the davits. We take it and put it on the bow of the boat and strap
Right.
it down.
Yep.
Because as soon as you start getting into any type of waves or weather or anything, I don't care how tight you make that dinghy in the back, it starts to get a mind of its own. And as someone said to us, if you're trying to manage the boat, it's heavy weather, and you're focused on controlling and managing the boat, do you really need to worry about the dinghy falling
Right.
off the back?
Right.
It's a distraction. So,
Yep.
something like that, which I don't consider anything to do with sailing, but someone said to us, put the damn thing on the front of the boat.
Yep.
And we have. Now, if we're going 10 miles or something and we know the seas are fine, then we'll use the davits.
Sure.
But other than that, it goes on the front. So,
Yep.
it's those non-sailing things that I'd say.
Yeah. No, that's
To
good
answer your
advice.
question.
Yeah, certainly about the dinghy. I've learned that lesson as well. You don't want the dinghy hanging off the back of the boat when the seas are getting rough and the wind is picking up.
Well, we've talked to people that drag their dinghy, and then we hear stories where, they get into a little rough weather or they back up, and the next thing you
Right.
know is the line to the dinghy is wrapped around
Around
their
the prop.
prop.
Yeah. Yeah. What about a piece of equipment? Is there a piece of equipment that you wish you would have bought sooner?
Hmm. Um,
Or did you basically go
I,
to West Marine and say, I'll take one of everything before you left?
I'm afraid to say I think we planned really well. Now, we didn't have the whisker pole, but I knew that, and we were
Yeah.
fine with that. Okay, that's more of a refinement. We did buy a water maker. We haven't used it yet, but
Oh,
we do have
okay.
the portable one. And we were just waiting to get over here. We're going to probably test it tomorrow
Yeah.
when we go out sailing. But I don't think there's anything specific that,
Very good.
gosh, we should have had one of those. We planned this for 3 years, so we did our homework.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Very good. Hey, Mike, it was really great catching up with you. I don't want to interrupt your pizza night here. Um, and
Well,
I'm glad
well,
we were
you'll get
finally
a kick
able
out
to
of
do
this.
this. Yeah.
Well, you'll enjoy this. The guy that handles the fuel dock makes the pizza. So you don't want to get on his bad side because we have to fuel up tomorrow.
That's right. That's right. So,
It's been a long trip, and we're just here now trying to enjoy what was 3 years in the making at
yeah.
this point.
Well, it's great that you've gotten this far, and I think let's when you get to another nice stopping point in the future, another month out or
Sure.
so, and let's do another check-in and see where you guys are and get an update on it. I think this is nice because our listeners can sort of follow along with with you as you guys have made your progress.
Yeah, and it's been great talking to you and you being in the same boat, so to speak, with almost the same boat and the same
Yep.
weather conditions up north. But I'll just say this is that again, we've met so many great people. We've had a lot of interesting encounters and excitement. And I will say, for people, it isn't a vacation, though. It's a lifestyle, because there's so much to do to get to the point where we are. But if you are prepared and you plan, you won't encounter too many
Right.
surprises.
Right. Yeah, it's a journey.
But
it's a life journey.
it's been one hell of a journey for us. So we're now enjoying the fruits of all that work, sitting here in 80-degree weather right now.
Yeah. Well, last night we had about a foot of snow up here, so you're in the right spot.
We look at the weather every morning and say, aren't we happy we're not there this winter?
Yeah.
So,
well, Mike, hey, it's been a real
all
pleasure.
right.
Thank you very much for making this happen. And we'll
You're
check
welcome.
in when you guys at
We will.
your next beautiful place. Take care. Bye-bye.
Great. And hopefully our Starlink will work. All right.
Yeah,
Bye,
that'd be great.
Bela.
Take care.
Bye.
Wow, Bela, that was a great conclusion to a pretty amazing story. Thanks for the update. What were your big takeaways?
Yeah, I find it interesting. On a sailboat, you sort of have to be self-sufficient when it comes to all sorts of stuff, particularly power, right? So we talk about, conserving energy and all this kind of stuff. And you get on a sailboat, particularly on a long cruise like this, you all of a sudden start really being careful about managing your resources. Mike talked about adding solar to his boat, so that he sort of can generate a fair amount of electricity, because these days there's also electricity runs everything on a boat. And so he doesn't have to run his generator. Generators tend to be a little noisy. They burn diesel fuel. Solar power on a boat, particularly when you're in the southern sections of the country, of the world, where there's a lot of sun, makes a heck of a lot of sense. And I remember listening to a podcast a number of years ago where these people had a nice big boat, and they would take out guests, friends with them. And whenever they would be out, their friends would say, "Oh, I'll do the dishes." And the comment was, "We never let guests do dishes because they use way too much water." So, because you only have a finite amount of water in your tanks. And so we always do the dishes because, I have it figured out exactly how to do these and rinse them and not use any excess water, where guests just, leave the faucet running like you do at like at home, and use tons of water. So I think this notion of cruising around on a sailboat or any boat or even a motor home, if you're going to do that, all of a sudden you get really tuned in to resources. And I think it's a good lesson for all of us to sort of, have that experience, because I think it makes you realize that when you're at home or you're in other situations where you can just turn on the faucet or turn on the power switch and you got all the power you want. So that was one takeaway.
It's a mindset, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, it's cool. Now, I have another question, and the regular listeners know I often ask a lot of questions that might sound a little bit dumb, but I kind of know what the Gulf Stream is, right? I mean, I know theoretically what it is, but why is it such a big deal for sailors, and why is it so? It seems like it's a risky, dangerous, big deal.
Yeah.
When you're making this crossing.
Yeah. So one thing I'll recommend is that you Google image Gulf Stream or Gulf Stream picture or something. There's these great images that satellites have taken of the Gulf Stream, and it's basically mapping water temperature. And it just really gives you a good visual of what the Gulf Stream looks like. So the Gulf Stream, the source of the Gulf Stream is in the Gulf of Mexico. The warm, shallow water there warms up the water. And for whatever reasons, the Coriolis effect of the world spinning, the earth spinning, and all that kind of stuff, that water kind of starts flowing, and it flows between the south tip of Florida and Cuba. And then when it goes around the south tip of Cuba, I think because of the depth of the water. So like where the Bahamas is and the sort of Caribbean chain, the water is really shallow there. So the water kind of turns north at the south tip of Florida and heads up the east coast of Florida and the east coast of the United States. And the narrowest part right there is between sort of like Miami and the Bahamas. It's like only 80 miles wide there. And so all this water kind of gets funneled through there. And it goes like 3 or 4 knots. I mean, it's considerable. And so when you're trying to get from the United States to the Bahamas, you got to go through the Gulf Stream. So so if you're trying to go east, it's pushing you north. So, and on a sailboat, you're not going that fast. You're only going 6 knots. So if it's pushing you north at 4 knots, you really got to sort of plan that out. And that's why Mike said they went much further south than where they wanted to end up, so that when they pointed due east, they were going east and north at the same time because of the current, and they ended up sort of where they wanted to be.
So they found a kind of sweet spot, right?
And people have figured this out. Right. People have figured this out. It's not a mystery, right? There's 1 or 2 places along the Florida coast where sailors in particular congregate. If you have a motorboat, it's a little different because you can go 20 knots and the 4 knots less of an impact. Now, here's the other thing that you have to be careful about. And this is true any place where there's a current. So inlets to harbors have this same challenge. When the current is going in one direction and the wind is blowing in the opposite direction, the waves get steep and big. And by steep, I mean they're very close together, right? Out in the ocean, the waves are often, the big rolling waves are like 4 or 5 seconds apart. So they're big rolling waves, but they're spaced. But when the wind is blowing in the opposite direction of the current, the waves bunch up and they're just as tall, but now they're really close together, which is not comfortable, and the waves even get bigger. So when you're going across the Gulf Stream, you hear people talking about a weather window. And what that means is they want to make sure the wind is from the south or there's no wind, right? Now, the other thing you have to remember is you don't want to leave like the day after a big storm, because it takes a day or 2 for the ocean to calm down. So if there was a high wind event for like 2 or 3 days, and then that wind left, the waves in the ocean had 2 or 3 days to build up. It's going to take a day or 2 for those waves to calm down. So that's why people talk about weather windows. You look at what direction the wind is blowing from. You want it to be either going, in this case with the Gulf Stream, you want the wind from the south blowing north, so in the same direction as the current, or you want little or no wind. And you don't want to, you don't want the previous day to have been really, really windy, so the waves are sort of confused, right? That's another thing that happens if the winds are from the north for like 3 days, and then they shift to the south the following day. Some waves are trying to head north and other waves are trying to head south, and the seas get confused. So when you're doing these types of things, you gotta kind of plan this stuff out a little bit. But yeah, that's the Gulf Stream. This is the trickiest part, is right here between Florida and the Bahamas. The Gulf Stream flows all the way up the east coast of the United States, past Nova Scotia, and over to the UK, right? So the current decreases, of course, the further north it goes, because it starts getting wider and wider and wider, but it flows in that direction. That's why the fishing is so good, the commercial fishing for cod and all that type of tuna and all that kind of stuff, in these various different places along the east coast of the United States, all the way up into Nova Scotia, because the water's warm, and warm water brings nutrients, attracts fish, and there you go.
Yeah. It's also responsible why we have nicer weather here, even though we're much farther north than you are. It's much warmer here year round because of the Gulf Stream, and that's how I kind of know it. But this was really interesting to hear about it kind of from the sailor's perspective. So, okay, so they got across the Gulf Stream, they found this window, and that was really interesting, listening to the apps and trying to figure out the timing, right, when you had a good, clear shot. Gets across. Anything else strike you as interesting about this particular trip?
No, I think it was a pretty uneventful trip, if you ask me. Right in the first episode, they talked about having the fuel problem and the engine stalling, having to get towed and stuff. But we addressed that in pretty good detail there. We talked about polishing fuel. I think the big thing, one of the big takeaways to me was you got to get out there and you got to get the experience. You can take courses, you can read books, and those courses and books give you the confidence to do these things and the confidence that you can learn the new things as they come along. So I thought, to me, that was a good one. We talked a little bit about energy conservation and sort of understanding in a boat, you're sort of off the grid, as they say. You are clearly off the grid. So you have to sort of be cognizant of all that stuff. And depending upon where you're going, there's sometimes local effects like the Gulf Stream. If you're trying to get from Florida over to the Bahamas, that you have to be aware of, and you don't want to leave under certain weather conditions.
Yeah, he said a couple of times he's a conservative sailor, and I think for somebody like him and in a boat like his, makes total sense, right? And him and his wife seem like they have a good approach, and they help each other and they support each other, and it just was a neat story that they could accomplish this goal, even though it sounded like a few times along the way things might get totally derailed.
Yep.
But they made it, so it was really, for me, kind of cool to have heard about this early on in the planning stage and this kind of wild goal that they had, and just each step of the way kind of overcoming these obstacles. And then, yeah, it was really cool. I mean, it was kind of good that his satellite system was down. It was kind of cool just to see him on his phone sitting on his boat. If people watch the YouTube version, they can see it. And you really got a sense of the relief that he had and how relaxed he was.
Yeah. And we'll check in with him again as they continue to make progress, probably down the Caribbean chain. And we'll track his progress as his adventure continues.
Sounds great. So that brings us to a nice ending for this part of the story, Bela. It was great that Mike and his wife accomplished their goal of making it to the Bahamas, and I'm looking forward to this next talk with him. So what do you think? Should we wrap this episode up?
Sounds good to me.
All right, listeners, thanks for joining us for yet another episode. We hope you found our conversation interesting and thought-provoking. If you had questions about what we've discussed, as always, please feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is sailingtheeast, that's all one word, @gmail.com.
Hey, if you enjoy the podcast, please hit that follow button on your favorite podcasting application. And as we said before, the podcast is also now available on YouTube, so you can subscribe there as well. So until next time, signing off from upstate New York. See you soon.
Sounds great, Bela. And from over here in Münster, Germany, where we're very hopeful that Gulf Stream is bringing us some spring weather. I'll see you next time.